The mothers knew exactly what they were doing. The silvery lionesses headed back the way they had come, onto the Circe, and off down the mooring rope on the moat. Then along the water's edge to the tunnel leading under Bastille Metro, back into the Canal of St. Martin. When she reached the third skylight, only dimly lit by the streetlights from above, she paused and breathed and waited. The bronze lioness went across the park until she came to the high wall. She sloped alongside it, passing the mysterious iron gates and doorways, till she came to one which was open. She slunk in, and from within she climbed carefully onto the top of the door, where she paused and breathed and waited. The yellow lionesses, with blood on her claws, raced down to the lock, but she was too late to reach Charlie and the others. They had been here. She could smell them. If she could, the dog would too. The yellow lioness flicked her whiskers, squatted down, and then she peed, a lot. She stared through the gloom, trying to make out the other side of the canal, but she couldn't see clearly. Then elegantly, carefully, she picked her way across the slender top of the lock gate. Cold, deep water on one side, 6-metre drop into cold, deep water on the other. At the other side she checked. Yes, a huge, rusty, spiked metal barrier bolted into the wall blocked the towpath on that side. Clearly people were not meant to use this side. She flicked her whiskers. She had seen locks before. Her plan would work. She shivered and she paused, and she breathed and she waited. They couldn't go back. They couldn't stay here. They couldn't do nothing. There was no time to think. So were they going to swim? Charlie looked out at the Seine, wide, rushing and undoubtedly cold. He looked at the wall. He looked at the ledge. He thought of all that CG had taught him about balance and agility and trusting your body. I've done the handstands and the rigging of the Circe, he thought. I can do this. Come on, he said, and he made to lead the lions out. One moment, said the young lion, take my tail. So the young lion led, and Charlie held onto his strong, wiry tail. Alcina and the oldest lion followed on behind, treading carefully on their sensitive cat feet and using their tails to balance. Away above and beyond them, the whole of the great city of Paris was carrying on. Its lights and its people, its busy roads and its chattering restaurants, its trees and its late-night shopping, its cars and bars and trains and parties, its hospitals and stations and harbours and circuses, and all alone in the heart of the city, this little queue of lions and boys walked slowly, carefully, invisibly along a narrow ledge between the water and the wall, and nobody knew they were there. Way beyond Paris at this very moment, though Charlie could not know it, his parents would be taken from a huge car park through a beautiful moonlight subtropical garden full of palm trees and huge rounded rocks with a stream trickling over them, and to a large, complex, low-lying building. Not that Magdalene and Neba could see it, they were still blindfolded. Hi there, smiled a pretty receptionist in the entrance hall. She had a plant on her desk and her eyes were blue and round, and her clothes extremely clean. She didn't seem to notice that the 2 guests were bound and gagged, or that the 3 men from the personnel department were propelling them at gunpoint. She didn't even seem to know that it was in the middle of the night. Hi there, we have an appointment with the chief executive, smiled one of the personnel guys. New staff arriving. Hey, welcome to the gated village community where we embrace our aspirations, the receptionist said cheerfully. And you are? Aniba and Magdalene said nothing. They couldn't. They were still gagged. It's Professor Start and Dr. Ashanti, said the other personnel guy. Magdalene was wondering why they were talking in exclamation marks, why the air smelt so sweet and cold, why such cheerful people didn't care about blindfolds and gags and guns, and what they were all doing at this time. Aniba was trying to identify the smell in the cool air. His nose twitched and his brain ran through its enormous knowledge of chemicals, plants and aromas. Great, the asthma guys, a receptionist cried and picked up the phone. He'll see you now, she trilled. He sounds so pleased to know that you're here. The lights twinkled above and far away. The lion's tail was firm and rough and warm in Charlie's hand. The cold night river air rose up to his right. The hard, cold, steep concrete walls stood immovably to his left. The dark water was just there beside him. Step by step, carefully, slowly, he looked at the young lion's back, not at anything else. Not the necklaces of the night on the far, far riverbank, not the great high bridge growing in height as they drew nearer to it. Step by step, he wanted desperately to look behind him and see if the mothers had caught up with them, but he couldn't. If he looked anywhere other than the lion's back, he would fall. It was that simple. Step by step, he had to place his feet a little closer together on each pace than he would naturally, because the ledge was so narrow. It made him feel slightly as if he were going to lose his balance. Step by step, watching the lion's back, breathing, tall, strong, the bridge loomed up in front of them, white and calm. The flyover to his left had swooped down now behind his great wall, its great wide road plummeting under the bridge. The ledge continued alongside, and so Charlie and the lions continued alongside too, under the bridge they longed to cross. As they came out the other side, the ledge widened a little, and Charlie took the courage to look back up at the bridge. There was nothing they could climb up to get onto it. How were they going to get up there? There was another bridge, way ahead upriver. Even if they could get onto that one, it was too far away. They had a train to catch and an angry guy with a big dog chasing them. Now he could see the great iron and glass curve of the roof of the station, just there across the river, so near, only a few hundred metres. For a second he looked down at the water that separated him from the station. He shivered. Then the young lion stopped. Charlie let go of his tail in surprise. The lion flicked it, once this way, once that. "Charlie," he hissed over his shoulder. "Yes," whispered Charlie. "There's an entrance here, a small tunnel. We could go in. What do you think?" Troy was at first confused by the sense of the three lionesses going in three different directions. Raffy stood dripping on the quayside by the Circe, glaring at him. "Find the scent, Troy," he said in a dangerously polite tone. Some last stragglers from the audience noticed him and stood for a moment looking on him in curiosity at the sodden, angry youth. He jerked his head back and gave them such a filthy look that they fled, chattering. Troy ran to and fro, whining and sniffing at the ground. Here, there. Then he picked up the scent of the yellow lioness, whose fur he had been given to smell, and raced swiftly down the basin after her. When he came to the lock, he balked at following the scent across the narrow gate tops, but with Raffy yelling at him from behind, he had little choice. Raffy followed him, nimbly considering he couldn't move his arm. The lioness was perched, motionless, on top of the remote lock control. In the dark, she just looked like a lump. Troy knew he was close, but he had no idea how close. The beam that passing boats had to break to operate the lock shone out invisibly just beneath her. As Raffy and Troy reached the safety, as they thought it, of the other side, she let her tail droop, flicked it slowly across the beam. Yes! A creak and a shudder warned that the lock gates were beginning to open. A growl and a leap and a thwack in the face with the golden tail were enough to confuse Raffy and Troy. Another leap onto the gates as they began to swing open, and from one gate to the other, yes, just before they swung too far open for the gap to be leapt. And there they were, Raffy and Troy on the far side of the canal, with no way back till the slow-moving lock closed again, and 20 minutes. The yellow lioness was gleaming her teeth at them from the side. She gave a short, sharp roar. The silvery lioness heard her, and using the same trick, set off the lock at the other end of the basin. It wouldn't start to work till the first lock was closed again, but for now Raffy and Troy were cut off, and however they tried to cross back, they would take much longer. Then the silvery lioness and the bronze lioness left their hiding places and swiftly, quietly hurtled down to join her. "We should go in," said the young lion. "It might lead somewhere, and anywhere is better than here." "Okay," said Charlie, glad that someone else had made the decision. He called back to the others what they were going to do, and then took the lion's tail again as they plunged into the darkness of this tiny riverside tunnel. It led directly into the bank. Inside it was dark, and the water in there was smelly and scummy. Plastic bottles bobbed, and Charlie could tell from the smell that there was litter and dirty, caked-up bubbles. That meant that the water stopped somewhere up ahead of them. Moving water would not smell this bad, if only the path would continue. It did. 20 metres inside the tunnel, the ledge suddenly widened out into a stone quay like the ones by the Canal St. Martin, and the water came to an end. Charlie could just make out what looked like a big round pipe sticking out of the wall ahead of them, dripping weed and smelling disgusting. Drains, Charlie thought. Sewage, maybe. Old drains. An open doorway led into the wall behind the quay. Again, the stonework was old and finely made, but by the look of it, nobody ever came here. "Stay here a moment," he whispered to the lions. "I'll go and see where it leads." He hoped that the lionesses would catch them up while they stopped, catch them up and say that the splash was just someone falling in, that the scream was just a scream of getting wet. Wrinkling their noses and flaring their whiskers at the smell, the lions prepared to wait. Concentrate, thought Charlie. Be careful. If he's in the canal, or if they've wounded him, he won't be following, at least not so quickly. I'll be as quick as I can, he said. Thanks, said Alcina, whose little nose was as wrinkled up as prune. She lay down on the stone pavement and buried it in her paws. Through the door was a staircase cut into stone. Up the staircase was another doorway. Through that doorway was a chamber. Charlie silently peered through to see what was there. It was mostly dark, but there was a dim light coming from somewhere, just enough to show him that the chamber was smallish, grubby, and absolutely filled with rubbish. But it was not just a dump, it was organised. 3 supermarket trolleys stood in a row, full of bits of old-fashioned wires and plugs and the insides of electrical accoutrements. One corner was piled high with big black plastic bags, some of which spilled pieces of cloth. Also, there was a small, low, fold-up table with a mug on it and some cushions arranged as 2 or 3 people might sit on them to talk to each other. And there was what could have been a bed. And on the bed was what could have been a person. And what could have been a person rolled over and snored deeply and flung out an arm, which knocked over a tall, ornate glass hubble-bubble pipe, so the top fell off and some of the water spilled and some last embers of tobacco fell out on the floor, sending the sweet aromatic smell of apple tobacco out into the room and reminding Charlie of the Arab cafes in London and the delicious pastries of nuts and honey. Concentrate. Across the room was a metal gate, beyond it the night sky with a huge road beneath it. Whoever brings this stuff in here must bring it from somewhere, must have access to the outside, access on foot, something other than the motorway flyover road, which no one could walk on. Charlie turned back down the stairs. Maybe the mothers will be there, they'll have caught us up. They weren't, they hadn't. He said to the lions, "Come on, there's something up there, but he's asleep. Wait in the doorway and I'll see if I can open the gate to the outside." His heart was beating fast as he held the lions back up the stairs. They coiled themselves up in the doorway, just out of the light, and waited for him silently, their eyes lazy but their whiskers alert. As he stepped out into the dim, grubby room, Charlie felt very strongly his responsibility for them. It was difficult to cross that room in silence. There were things all over the floor, and there were dark corners and curious shadows, and there was a scary snoring figure, and there was very little light. It wasn't really Charlie's fault that he trod on an old roller skate and fell into a pile of scrap metal and hit his head and yelled, and that the sleeping man woke up screeching. And it certainly wasn't Charlie's fault that the lions glanced at each other and then leapt as one from the doorway to the man's bedside, where they surrounded him, staring down at him, their claws out, their eyes intent, their fang-filled jaws hanging open, growling, ready to pounce. "Stop it!" yelled Charlie. The poor man shrieked and shrieked. The oldest lion put his paw on his chest and roared. It worked. He stopped shrieking and started gibbering instead, but this was at least quieter. "Stop it," said Charlie, "please." The lions looked round. "You're scaring—" He had been going to say, "You're scaring him." It came out as, "You're scaring me." Alcina looked at him sideways. The oldest lion flicked his whiskers. "Sorry," said the young lion. Charlie thought quickly. Then he went over to the poor mangy beard. "Tazavus," he said. It meant shut up, but he hoped that by using the polite form Tazavus instead of "'twas toy, the man might realise that he didn't mean to be rude. How silly. There were 3 lions on his chest. The man would not be worrying about manners. "We are a nightmare," he said. "You mustn't tell anyone about us. Do you want to get rid of us? Tell us where the road is. Then we can go there. How do we get to the bridge?" The man, who was not very old and had a pleasant face as far as he could be seen beneath his abject terror, could not speak. He tried to. He seemed to want to, but though his mouth moved and his tongue flapped, no noise emerged. "Lions," murmured Charlie. "Perhaps you should get off him for a bit." The lions withdrew and lay like a circle of sphinxes close around the man. He looked up at Charlie and blinked and swallowed. "Take your time," said Charlie, "but not too long. We're in a hurry." The man looked back at the lions and back at Charlie. When he spoke, finally, it was in Arabic. But they're Moroccan," he shouted. "Indeed," said Charlie, a little surprised that the man should recognise them. "So what?" "So am I," shouted the man. Having got his voice back, he now didn't seem able to control it. Fear does funny things to people. Salam alaikum, said Charlie. Now how do we get to the bridge? Left out of here, up the staircase, along, and it's on the left, the man said, staring and clutching his blanket to him. The gate is open. The gate is open. Thank you, said Charlie in Arabic. Oh, sure, 1,000 thanks. One is enough, said the man, wide-eyed, as the lions trooped past him out to the deserted, silent midnight riverbank. Charlie had hoped that if anyone saw them, they'd think they were a trick of the light, a cat, an urban fox. That cat looked huge, they might say. Did you see it? But the cat would be gone, and the night would be still again. But from the shadows at the top of the staircase, they could see that it was still too busy for them to cross the bridge on the pavement or the road. On the outside of the bridge's wall, there was a ledge. It was much the same width as a ledge alongside the river, and was about 100 metres up in the air. We can use that, said the oldest lion. Charlie looked at it. If he fell, he would tumble into the cold river, or bash his head on the white stone bridge, or drown, or have a heart attack. The lions made themselves as flat as flatfish and slithered over the wall. Charlie just held his tongue between his teeth and repeated the words, I have no choice, I have no choice. Just in time, he realised that of course he had a choice. The lions, it was true, couldn't be seen wandering about the place without being picked up and taken back, but nobody would question a boy crossing a bridge. Why should they? See you on the other side, he hissed, and he ran and jumped across the bridge, doing cartwheels and flip-flaps just because he could, and because he was so scared that he would do anything he could to pretend that he was not. End of chapter 17. I hope you enjoyed that.